Okay, so let us start with 3 salutations. Salutation to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Okay, today is March 31st, 2012. You're not playing an April Fool's trick on me. Today's March 31st. Okay, and then I have to make the announcement for those who are listening in from a distance. If you have questions that come up on the sutta, or if you have questions that come up, please keep them concise and relevant to the sutta. Again, I'm not an expert on neurocybernetics or astrophysics, so don't ask me how the teaching relates to neurocybernetics or astrophysics. I don't know. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And today we are taking sutta. It's called the Kīṭāgiri Sutta. This is sutta number 70 in the Middle Length Discourses, beginning on page 577. Okay, so the sutta begins when the Buddha was wandering in the Kasi country. Kasi is the state, at that time it was the state in which the city of Benares or Varanasi is located, together with a large company of monks. And then he addressed the monks thus. He said, "Monks, I abstain from eating at night. By so doing, I am free from illness and affliction, and I enjoy lightness, strength, and a comfortable or healthy abiding." Then he says to the monks, "You too abstain from eating at night. By doing so, you too will be free from illness and affliction, and you will enjoy lightness, strength, and a comfortable abiding." Okay, so this statement by the Buddha is referring to one of the observances of the monastic life. Apparently, I discussed this very briefly in relation to Sutta number 66, which we took, I think it was before I went to California, so back in January. January. That it seems that in the early part of the Buddha's teaching career, there was not yet a fixed rule that required all of the monks to cut off their meals for the day at midday. Because we see from certain suttas that the monks speak about wandering on alms round during the morning, in the afternoon, and at night. And it seems that no criticism was directed to them. But at a certain point, and perhaps this marks the point, the Buddha laid down this principle, or at least he gave this request to the monks, that they avoid eating at night, or actually the rule is to avoid eating after midday. And so we have the sort of familiar or standard description of the practice of the monk. For example, in Sutta number 27, that he practices eating only one meal a day, or actually in one part of the day, abstaining from eating at night and what's called outside the proper time. That is, the proper time for the monastic meal is between, call it the break of dawn, when the sky starts to get light, and then the midday point. So normally that will be 12 noon, but with the daylight savings time it gets extended to 1 p.m., which is the real midday point. And so this rule has been preserved quite carefully within the Theravada tradition. So generally in some, let's say in some monasteries, particularly the forest monasteries in Thailand, the monks take only one meal a day. They go on alms round very soon after it turns light. And then if you're going on alms round, you have to walk from the monastery, living in the forest, so they have to go to a village, so it could take them half an hour, 45 minutes to go to the alms resort. So if they set out at 7 a.m., by the time they get there, it's 7:30, 7:45. Then you walk on alms round, it could take them 20 minutes, half an hour. Then by the time they get back to the monastery, it's 9 o'clock. Could be 8:45, 9 o'clock. Then they take their meal at 9 o'clock. And it's a sumptuous meal, so that's the one meal for the day. But in most of the village, town monasteries, and in Sri Lanka, also in the forest monasteries, of course people will bring food to the temple. So usually the monks take 2 meals. They'll take a breakfast, could be 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m., and then they'll take a midday meal, could be 11:15, 11:30, but it will be finished by 12 noon. And, you might be terrified when you hear this and think, I'm never going to become a monk, I'll never become a nun. Too difficult. But, just breakfast and lunch, how to manage. But actually within, the Buddhist tradition, the midday meal is a really substantial meal. It's the equivalent of supper in the USA. It's quite a full meal, so that, when you take that meal, if you really eat properly, then you don't really feel hungry in the evening. Or at least after, maybe at the beginning you do, but when you do it for some time, the body sort of reprograms itself to expect a substantial meal at midday, and then through the rest of the day, somehow it learns to digest the food and to assimilate it, metabolize it and everything. So the programming changes so that one doesn't get hungry in the evening. But first one always has the habit and one starts to panic. Oh, it's 6 o'clock. Oh, I'm starving. But after some time, if you really make certain to get sufficient food at midday, then that sort of psychological conditioning wears out, and you just don't feel hungry. But of course you have to be careful to get a substantial meal at midday. And I remember a little embarrassment, but I'll tell it. When I was still in graduate school and I was teaching part-time at State California State College at Fullerton, in Fullerton, New York. It was coming to the Los Angeles area a quite well-known Sri Lankan monk named Venerable Piyadasi Mahatera. And so I invited him to come teach at my class, to give talks to my class, the morning and afternoon classes. And then I invited him to come for lunch, to come to the place where I was living, I think on the next day or the day before, to the house where I was staying. And I thought, wow, these Theravada monks, they don't eat in the evening, they just eat breakfast and lunch, so I invited him for lunch. And so it was such an honor. I thought these monks must be really ascetic. So I prepared lunch for him, a bowl of soup. These noodle soups. like ramen. Now that I've been a monk, I know it. He took it with showing a great deal of equanimity, but I know what he was thinking. I would sometimes, I would get invited by fellow Americans who don't know the tradition. Maybe it's my karma coming back to me. They serve a bowl of ramen soup. Or a cheese sandwich with lettuce and tomato. And you have to show gratitude and appreciation. But you're thinking, the next morning, I'm going to eat a breakfast that's going to last me for a week. And through the evening, when it's thinking, looking at the time, is it breakfast time yet? Is it breakfast time? One wakes up in the middle of the night. Is it 5 a.m. yet? What? 2 a.m.? Can't get through the night. Oh, I'm afraid, poor Venerable Piyadasi. Later in Sri Lanka, he became like one of my best friends. So we never brought up the issue of the lunch that I offered him. But I now know what poor Venerable Piyadasi must have been thinking. He must have been calling up his Sri Lankan lay supporters back in Los Angeles and telling them, I had a lunch with this American university teacher, so please have a real good breakfast waiting for me tomorrow. Okay, so anyway, this is the advice Buddha is giving to the monks to abstain from eating at night. And he says that if you live in this way, then the body will be light, strong, and healthy. And then the question comes up, why did the Buddha lay down this ruling? I think that there are several reasons. One of them, I think, is to maintain some kind of accord with the ascetic tradition of India at the time. Because the Buddha struck out what is called the middle way between self-indulgence, indulgence in sense pleasures, and the other extreme of self-mortification, or really tough, self-afflictive ascetic practices. But many of the Buddha's contemporaries were following very austere practices, like, just reducing their intake of food to just a handful of rice a day, and going on long fasts, and sometimes just eating fallen fruits. And so the Buddha wanted the monastic order to at least exhibit certain ascetic traits. So even though the monks would eat a substantial meal at midday, but by abstaining from meals in the afternoon and night, they're at least flowing within that ascetic stream. Another reason that I mentioned in connection with the previous sutta is to ease the burden on lay people. Because if the monks are going on alms round 2 times, 3 times a day, then lay people have to prepare the food for the monks 2-3 times a day. And if there's a large company or company of monks, sometimes one reads about the Buddha traveling with, 100 monks, 500 monks, then, it's quite a challenge to prepare food several times a day for so many monks. And then another reason given in that sutta, the sutta number 66, is that when the monks would travel on alms round, if they would go after dark, and in India, let's say in Sri Lanka, it always gets dark about between 6 p.m. and 6:30 p.m., not like in North America where we have long spring and summer. So if you go 7 p.m., it's already dark, and then you can get into trouble falling into cesspits, getting gored by wild animals, bitten by dogs, and so on. Attacked by hoodlums. Okay, so the Buddha laid down this rule with the understanding that the monks will take sufficient food to keep themselves strong and healthy. They won't place a burden on lay people to prepare the food, and they will not endanger themselves by wandering around at night. And also, this is actually the great advantage that I found as a monk. When you know that the mealtime is cut off, at midday, then you feel like you have the rest of the day all for your own practice, study. You don't have to be concerned about, attending to an evening meal. One doesn't have to go through the process of digesting the meal, getting burdened with physical sense of torpor due to eating a sumptuous meal and then having to digest it. So the body feels light, energetic, and as I said, if you take sufficient food at midday, it's enough to sustain one through. Okay, so now it seems that there was, at the time, a group of monks. Well, let us just continue. Okay, so the monks staying with the Buddha accept his advice. Okay, then as the Buddha is wandering through the Kasi country, he eventually arrives at a town called Kīṭāgiri. Giri means a hill or a little mountain, so it must be on the side of a mountain, or just below a mountain. And so the Buddha took up residence there. Okay, so at the time there was a group of monks led by 2 other monks called Assaji and Punabhasuka, who were living at Kīṭāgiri. And then a number of monks went to them and told them that the Buddha has now laid down this piece of advice or these instructions to abstain from eating at night. By so doing, they are free from illness and affliction and so on. And then these monks, the monks advise the group led by Assaji and Punab, A and P, let's call them A and P. It's easier, Punabhasuka, somewhat difficult to pronounce. They say, "Come, you also should follow this observance." But the monks led by Assaji and Punab A and P replied, "Friends, we eat in the evening, in the morning, and in the day outside the prescribed time, that is in the afternoon. By so doing, we are free from illness and affliction, and we enjoy lightness, strength, and good health. So why should we abandon this benefit or this practice that is beneficial to us right here and now? in order to pursue, to take up some practice which is supposed to be to bring benefits in the future. And then they explicitly reject the Buddha's advice. They say, we'll continue eating in the evening, in the morning, and in the afternoon. And so now they are deliberately rejecting the instructions of the Buddha. And so apparently the monks probably tried to persuade them. They said, this is the word of the Buddha. He's your teacher. You should follow his guidance. We're all doing it. You should do so too. But the monks sent by the Buddha were not able to convince the group led by A and P. And so eventually they gave up on their efforts and they returned to the Buddha and announced to the Buddha that they had failed in their mission. And so now the Buddha sends, the Buddha's pretty tough, so he doesn't think, let me hear what these monks have to say, maybe they're right. But he says, call those monks, bring them to me, I'm going to speak to them. So the messenger monk goes to A and P, reports to them, and says, come to see the master. Okay, so they all come to the Buddha. Then the Buddha says, first, the Buddha won't, this is an interesting point about the Buddha's procedure. Even though a report about misbehavior on the part of some monks comes to him, when the Buddha sends for them, he doesn't begin right away by reproaching them. Because it could be that the report that he heard was wrong, or that there's some sort of underlying explanation that hasn't been brought out explicitly. And so the Buddha, when somebody is criticized, when the Buddha calls for that person, he always asks, is it true that this is the case? And then the Buddha won't start to criticize that person or that group until they admit that their misbehavior is actually true. So the Buddha says, here I'm about the middle of page 578, a little above the middle. The Blessed One then said to them, Bhikkhus, is it true that when a number of monks went and told you, advised you to abstain from eating at night, you refused to do so, and you gave some argument to justify yourself? And then they admit to this. They said, yes, this is the case. Okay, and now the Buddha is going to begin a kind of disquisition on the nature of feeling. And I sent actually this table to Kīṭāgiri this morning thinking that she would get it. There was a handout, but I think she didn't get the one that I sent at 9 o'clock. But it's not very complicated, so I could do it using the board. This is what's going to be entered into here is a kind of analysis of feeling. Okay, so now the Buddha starts on this kind of detailed analysis of feeling. So he says, have you known me to teach the Dhamma in such a way as this? Whatever this person experiences, whatever feeling this person experiences, whether pleasant or painful or neither painful nor pleasant, it's neutral feeling, unwholesome states diminish in him, and wholesome states of mind, increase. And the monks say, no, Venerable Sir. Okay, so this sort of inquiry or investigation of feeling is undertaken. The text, strangely, the sutta doesn't really make it explicit, but I think that the commentary brings out the point. I think we could see the point if we just look into it. I think the point that the Buddha is driving at is that the reason why these monks insist on eating 3 times a day is that they enjoy the taste of food. They have the craving for food. And when they are indulging that craving, then they are experiencing pleasant feelings. And so the kind of pleasant feelings that they are enjoying through indulging their craving for taste, it's the kind of pleasant feeling that sets off unwholesome states. It's gratifying their craving. This doesn't mean that whenever one eats, inevitably unwholesome states of mind are going to arise, which is why the Buddha taught that one should use reflection before eating, that one reviews or reflects on the purpose for taking the food. This is a practice that is taught to newly ordained monks, that one should reflect that one uses this food not for the sake of making the body, muscle-bound and beautiful and attractive, not for the sake of just sensual enjoyment or for indulging the craving for taste, but one eats the food only to sustain this body, to make it healthy, to keep on going in good health, and to live the spiritual life. Okay, so now sort of the Buddha is approaching this criticism indirectly by posing these questions about feelings. And so he continues. Now he comes into the actual analysis of feeling. He's in paragraph 7, section 7. Haven't you known me to teach the Dhamma in such a way as this? Here, when someone feels a certain kind of pleasant feeling, unwholesome states increase in him and wholesome states diminish. But when someone feels another kind of pleasant feeling, unwholesome states diminish and wholesome states increase. And then the same question is posed with respect to painful feeling and the neutral feeling. With regard to certain kinds of painful feeling, unwholesome states increase, wholesome states diminish. With respect to other kinds of painful feeling, unwholesome states diminish and wholesome states increase. And then the same thing in regard to neutral feeling. So we can put up my analysis. I should say the Buddha's analysis this way. So you could see how finally the Buddha analyzes, distinguishes these different types of feeling, what kind of result arises from these feelings, and how to respond to these feelings. Okay, you could copy it down. Okay, so we just take from the text. Okay, someone feels a certain kind of pleasant feeling. Unwholesome states increase. Wholesome states diminish. But somebody feels another kind of pleasant feeling. That would be pleasant feeling 2. In that case, unwholesome states diminish and wholesome states increase. Then the same thing is said with regard to painful feeling and with regard to neutral feeling. What would be example? Let's see if we could think of some examples. A pleasant feeling which causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish. Some examples.
Wanting something pleasant, wanting it to increase and remain.
Okay, so wanting something pleasant, but usually when one wants something pleasant, is that time the pleasant feeling present? How would you put it?
Ice cream, French fry, chocolate,
Wait,
Prozac.
and what? Prozac.
And dinner time.
Let's strike chocolate off the list. So, ice cream, French fries, what?
Sex would be one of them. That's hard as one. Sex itself.
Excuse me?
Sex itself would be
Okay, sexual enjoyment.
Alcohol.
Okay, but it's not just the thing itself, French fries, ice cream, but it's eating it with, we get ice cream. Now I don't eat ice cream, but in the past I did. I used to like it. In fact, to speak about poor lunches, within the Sri Lankan tradition, if they invite monks for lunch, for the dessert, they will offer a dish of, call it the fruit cocktail, chopped up fruits. Then there's something called curd and, what is it, treacle? This is all at one dessert. It's the syrup from the palm tree. It's very, very delicious. They call it honey, but it's not the same as bees' honey. But it's very sweet. It's a little bit like
maple syrup.
That's exactly. Maple syrup would be our North American counterpart, but it comes from a kind of palm tree. So they put that palm syrup, palm honey on top of the curd, the buffalo curd. Then there'll be a pudding, something like a tapioca pudding. Then there could be a plate of different kinds of cakes and cookies. And then, to top it off, sometimes there'll be a dish of ice cream. So the monks have to show themselves very calm, self-possessed, and equanimous, with equanimity. But, Venerable Sir, would you like some ice cream? And so one can... with a kind of royal indifference, nod the head, or just hold out the dish so that they could put the ice cream into the dish. Okay, so there are things that basically that I would say the main sources of these unwholesome, pleasant feelings arising. One would be the indulgence of sexual desire. The other is indulgence of taste. But there can be other things which are quite popular nowadays.
Music, right? Music would be also...
Okay, but it seems to me, this is my own personal opinion, that there are different types of music. Even though according to the monastic code, like music is, monks are prohibited from listening to music. But it seems to me that in the Buddha's day, music was generally a kind of sensual entertainment. And I think like the great composers of European composers like Bach, Mozart, Vivaldi, Beethoven, Haydn, Handel, who was the others? Pergolosi, Telemann. I mean, all of those are aesthetically beautiful, and sometimes they're deeply spiritual. So I sometimes say, I know this gets recorded and broadcast, and it's going to create a bit of a scandal over the internet, but I sometimes say, if the Buddha was alive today, I would say, please, Bhante, come listen to this Bach cantata or this Mozart piano concerto or this Beethoven string quartet. And are you really going to prohibit this? But when if you watch any of these Indian movies and you see the la 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 la, why are you laughing? I think that's pretty much what the music must have been like back in the Buddha's time. But even the Indian classical music is also very deep and very beautiful. Like Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar Khan. You see, I know all of these names.
But the sensual laws also in the first and second jhana that the Buddha said. Because the Buddha mentioned about the first and second jhana, you could still have rapture.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah,
he
but
mentioned everything.
Yeah.
Everything that actually brings you closer to an attraction.
Yeah.
And that is rapture, so you
Yeah.
should rid of it, in other words.
Yeah. So it seems to me, this is my argument, that it seems to me that the kind of pleasure that comes from really great music can bring one, I'm not going to say that it will bring you into a jhana, but it sort of lays a foundation for a tranquil, elevated, sublime state of mind that could dispose it towards deeper, towards samadhi. Whereas the kind of music like, rock music, I don't want to offend anybody's sense of...
I love rock, but I like rock.
Yeah.
It's not like the whole rock, but I could still get into a nice state of mind with it.
Excuse me?
I could still enjoy it the same way anybody would enjoy the soft music.
Yeah.
I love rock.
Yeah.
But it has the meaning behind it.
Yeah.
Is what I'm enjoying and the music behind it, because I love guitar.
Yeah.
So I have different understanding of it as some people that see it as noise.
Yeah.
And I see a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So it's different, very
well. Anyway, in my experience, music like that sort of agitates and disturbs the mind. So, if one is exposed to it, then if one wants to do meditation, it takes time for the mind to settle down. So, for all I know, there could be rock musicians, because it also involves some kind of concentration. So maybe those who are performing it develop that capacity for concentration, so maybe they could become meditators quite easily. I don't know.
George Harrison.
Actually, George Harrison, was the one who became very interested in meditation, and he was the one who brought this, what's his name? Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. onto the international stage. But I think at some point George Harrison turned away from him and started exploring other things. Okay, so now we come pleasant feelings in which unwholesome states diminish, wholesome states increase. And this is quite important because you see the way the Buddha makes these distinctions. In the Buddha's time, there was amongst the ascetic communities, there was the idea that pleasure of every type is dangerous. One has to avoid any kind of pleasurable experience. So the ideal becomes to subject oneself to as much pain as possible through these ascetic practices. But the Buddha says that there are types of pleasure in which unwholesome states diminish and wholesome states increase.
Attending this class.
For you guys. Yeah, I hope so.
You've already said Bach, Beethoven, Telemann.
Okay, that's good, in my opinion, yeah. Yeah, I would say that, listening to the classical music, in my experience, it causes these, sense of higher reality, that when you listen to this, you have to think like these, stock materialists, they just have to be wrong, that there is some kind of real spiritual dimension which is sort of just flowing down, and if we tune our minds to the right level, we can tap into that higher spiritual dimension. Any other?
Meditation.
It's the same with other kinds of entertainment. There are movies and books that are just garbage.
Yeah.
And there are other kinds of literature,
Yeah.
poetry and literature that act like great music.
I think exactly the same, yeah. Okay, and Johnny said?
Meditation.
Yeah, meditation. I mean, often it's somewhat difficult at the beginning. If you're sitting in meditation, the mind wanders, you have to struggle with it, the body feels pain. But if you persist, then very elevated, pleasant states will start to arise.
But those also can become very addictive in a way. But those can be addictive also.
Yeah, of course the Buddha always, he gives the sort of remedy to that by saying that, once you attain these states, don't become attached to them, but contemplate them with insight.
Correct. I have people that tell me that they were meditating and they're happy when they meditate. That when they are meditating, but when they are not, they just came out of it. I told them, the way I saw it was, I said, well, that's no different than being drunk. Because if you're only happy when you're meditating, then you get out there and that's it, you're unhappy. Yeah. So you must be happy all day, live in meditation. Yeah. Take that with you.
Yeah.
Like you say, get out of meditation mindfully. Be there with
it. Okay, so I think we have enough examples of pleasant feelings that cause wholesome states to increase, unwholesome states to diminish. Okay, let us go to painful feelings now. Painful feelings that cause unwholesome states to increase, wholesome states to diminish. Richard. Okay, maybe just speak a little more loudly or take the mic. Okay, or actually getting bit by bed bugs, getting bit by mosquitoes. This is the interesting thing. So much lies not in the actual, let's say, the sensation itself, but in the response to it. Because everybody can get bit by bed bugs, bit by mosquitoes, and if one doesn't avert to it properly and doesn't reflect on it properly, then sort of the natural instinctive reaction is to get angry, to get upset, and maybe slam on the mosquito. To get rid of bedbugs is difficult. But if one trains the mind properly, then one learns how to undergo these experiences without reacting in that way. Does anybody have actual experience with bedbugs? Richard has. Johnny has. With one of the things that I learned in Sri Lanka, I never knew what bedbugs were before I went to Sri Lanka. Sometimes I used to come in the evening when I would be sitting at the desk. They had these chairs made out of this kind of, maybe they were bamboo strips that had been cut up into little slivers and wound up. And I would be sitting, I would notice a little painful sensation in the elbow. And I would turn and I would see some kind of little bug. It would always manage to squeeze underneath the slivers of bamboo and hide. Then later, when I went to bed, when I would wake up in the morning, I would notice these little bugs running under the mattress and squeezing into the mattress or into holes in the pillows. Later, they vanished. I didn't do anything to them.
How did you come here? What do you think happened?
I would put the things out in the sun. Yeah, that would be the solution. Yeah. Okay, any other things that cause painful feelings, that cause unwholesome states to increase, wholesome states to diminish?
There are all kinds of negative mind states like worry, and resentment.
Yeah, those are the unwholesome qualities themselves. Yeah, but it would be, probably we'd say, the situations that, let's say, disagreeable situations cause the feeling to arise. And then from that feeling, I would say then, you see, the way the word feeling is used, it doesn't denote what we call feelings in ordinary English. But feeling means simply the quality of an experience as being pleasant, painful, and neutral.
What came to me right away was child abuse, children who were punished.
You mean when you see that?
Yes, that the pain that they experience will bring about unwholesome
that is very true.
And punishment.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. But let's take maybe some examples just from our own day-to-day experience. You okay?
How about when you overeat?
Okay, maybe I heard it, but for some people, take the microphone.
When one overeats.
Yeah, that's a good example. If one overeats.
And if your stomach becomes big and bloated all through the night, and it's very unpleasant, it's unwholesome, it's not good.
Yeah, so almost any kind of ailment, let's say, can cause, it's a painful feeling, and then it can cause unwholesome states to increase if one sort of reacts to it by, getting angry with others or feeling upset, feeling miserable. So if we get upset, if we get like an upset stomach or any kind of illness, of course it's the natural tendency of the mind is to get upset as well. But just through some kind of reflection, we just reflect, this is the nature of life, this is the nature of the body, then we can endure it with greater balance. Okay, let's move on now. This is a more interesting case. Painful feelings that cause unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, I
Yeah, put the microphone a little closer.
I'm thinking about when you're used to eating all day long and you stop.
Yeah.
And towards that 7 o'clock period of supper, what you think is supper period.
Yeah.
When you don't eat.
Yeah.
And it's just very unpleasant.
Yeah.
But your body is starting to, feel better.
Yeah.
And that loneliness definitely goes away.
Yeah, this is actually a very good example. And it applies, we don't have to take it just in a narrow application to, the newly ordained monk who's abstaining from eating in the evening. But any person who's sort of like used to indulging with a lot of food or unhealthy food and develops like the addiction to, they call them Big Macs and French fries and a malted or milkshake, and then they stop. Then you start getting you start getting painful feelings, but those painful feelings will be part of the process of breaking the addiction to unhealthy foods. And then once you get through, as you're working through that addiction, then I would say wholesome mental states are arising. It's true with any kind of addiction. Even, cigarette smoking. When you stop, cigarette smoking, there's always this yearning for this, one thing I need right now, it's to prove that I can stop smoking is a cigarette. Or addiction to liquor. The one thing that I need to prove that I've stopped drinking is a drink. But as one resists that urge, then one, is cultivating wholesome states. Some other examples. Okay, we'll take Richard first and Barbara.
Mourning and grief often have that effect, that is in caring for people who are you care about, who are dying and such, because
it's good if you take the hand mic.
Yeah, it helps you to realize the brevity of life and to pay more attention to what you actually value and want to further.
Okay, this is quite a good example. Yeah. Okay, Barbara.
Yeah, I was thinking about physical exercise, but there's that point. Up to a point, the painful brings on wholesomeness.
Yeah.
You go beyond it, and it's unwholesome.
I think that is true. Yeah.
When you're meditating, like when I first started, I had a lot of.
Take the hand microphone.
When I first started meditating, I used to have a lot of knee problems, and what I did was when I got into I did better when I did insight meditation.
Yeah.
I started doing it in my pain, and I saw it there.
Yeah.
And apparently it just doesn't happen no more. I can meditate, I feel pain, it's just there.
Yeah.
And for some reason it gives me, not the pleasure, but it's neither. It's more like neutral feeling that you don't really see it, just let it be.
Yeah.
So it becomes, a good, source of our feeling, because then you realize you accomplish that. Now you have, the meditation is much deeper, of course.
Yeah.
Accomplish something through pain.
Yeah. In fact, I would say that just about everybody, except for those who have very mature faculties from many lives of practice, but just about everybody, when we sit down to start meditating, start learning to meditate, you get boredom, restlessness, drowsiness, laziness, sense of what is the point of this. And then the bodily pains start, and then you think, why am I subjecting myself to this pain, to this discomfort? But that's just part of the process. And then, but as you're sitting there, just bringing the mind back to the breath or to whatever object one is focusing on, rising and falling, bodily sensations. It seems that this is a pointless exercise, but as you're doing this, then gradually sort of the tendency to mental distraction, restlessness, agitation is getting pushed away, and the mind is learning how to focus. Then once the mind settles, then onto its object and becomes well-focused, then one starts to feel, well, then a pleasant feeling comes in, which is something very different from the pleasures of the senses that we ordinarily feel in our day-to-day lives.
I got one from the internet.
Okay, good.
This is sadness caused by empathy for someone else suffering. That's the statement. Sadness
caused by empathy for somebody else that's suffering. I think this is a good point. Now, what's usually said in the Buddhist tradition, I'm not so sure that I completely agree with this, is that sadness is always an unwholesome quality. It doesn't seem to me to be completely true.
I guess that developed compassion, that may be true.
Yeah. If somebody sort of becomes attached to their grief or to their sorrow and lets it overwhelm them, then it's, I'd say, leading into an unwholesome quality. But somebody could use this experience of sorrow or grief as a way to, in this case, to develop empathy with others who are going through grief, or else to gain some understanding about the nature of life. And so in this way, the unwholesome, but the painful feelings are a gateway to wholesome states of mind.
I think that's what you meant.
Yeah. Okay. And let's just say that there are counterparts and neutral feelings, but we'll move on. I'm sure that you could just use your own experience as a basis for drawing out examples of neutral feelings, which belong to either camp. Okay, so now the Buddha enters, after he goes through this kind of classification of feelings, he goes through a long questionnaire in which he just wants to emphasize the point. We don't have to read through all of these, but the point is that the Buddha is making here is that he's not just speaking from hearsay, but he's speaking on the basis of what he has known, seen, found, realized, and contacted by wisdom. That, in other words, he's saying that he knows how these feelings belong to each of these classes on the basis of his own personal experience, his own realization through wisdom. Okay, so this takes us all the ways through the end of passage of section 10. So we're now on page 580, and now we come to what's, in a sense, the core or main part of the sutta, which begins with section number 11. And here the Buddha is going to enter into a lengthy classification of types of noble persons, noble individuals. And I think the reason why he's doing that eventually is to indicate to these monks who have been indulging themselves and refusing to follow his instructions that they have not yet reached any of these levels of noble attainment. And so if all of these monks that the Buddha is going to mention have either completed their work with diligence or are striving with diligence, and these monks don't even fit within those categories, then they should be even more diligent than the others. Okay, so the Buddha says, I do not say of all monks that they still have work to do with diligence, nor do I say of all monks that they have no more work to do with diligence. And the word that represents diligence here is, the Pali word is appamada. Does everybody have this? Even if you don't worry, there's a handout that I sent to Kaiti. I'll ask her to send it by email to everybody registered. I'll just make this into a portion. the word is appamada, which means literally the absence of pamada. Pamada means negligence, heedlessness, carelessness, sloppiness. It's connected with laziness, indolence, lack of mindfulness. And diligence, appamada, you could say is it's a quality that involves the interplay of mindfulness and effort, right effort. And there's a famous chapter in the Dhammapada, the second chapter, called Appamada, the chapter on diligence or heedfulness. And in that, the first verse says that diligence is the way to the deathless. Negligence or heedlessness is the way to death. Those who are heedless, those who are heedful do not die, whereas the heedless or negligent are as if already dead. Okay, so now the Buddha is going to distinguish between the monks who still have work to do with diligence and those who don't have any more work to do with diligence. And then in passage 12, paragraph 12, he says, I do not say of those monks who are arhats, with the taints destroyed, who have lived the holy life, the spiritual life, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, reached the true goal, destroyed the fetters of being or existence, and are completely liberated through final knowledge. I do not say that they still have work to do with diligence. And why is that? They have done their work with diligence. They are no more capable of being negligent. Okay, so the arhats, those are the disciples who have reached the fruit of liberation, who have reached the fruit of full awakening and liberation. They have realized the goal, cut off all of the fetters, and so there's no possibility for them to become negligent. To become negligent, one has to have a tendency to laziness, carelessness, lack of mindfulness, and the arhats have eliminated those tendencies. But then the Buddha says, I say of such monks who are in training, whose minds have not yet reached the goal and who are still aspiring to supreme security from bondage, that they still have work to do with diligence. Okay, so the monks who are called here, those in higher training, the Pali word is sekha. So the word sekha comes from the verb sikati, which means to train oneself. And so the sekha is somebody who is still in training. And technically, the trainer, the trainee, the one in training, refers to a disciple who has reached the irreversible path to liberation, no longer capable of falling away from the path. But this is a person who is bound to eventually reach full liberation. But they still must continue to train in the threefold training. What is the threefold training?
Training in concentration, wisdom,
We have to get...
ethics.
Okay, you got them right, but let's get the right sequence.
Training in ethics first, then wisdom, concentration and wisdom.
Okay, so it's the training in the ethics, training in, it's called the training of the higher mind, which means training in concentration, and training in wisdom. So they have to pursue this threefold training. Usually once they become the Seika, the training in ethics comes quite naturally to them. So that doesn't really require much effort, but they still must continue to train in samadhi or concentration and in panya or prajna, wisdom. And so it's the trainee is one described as one who has not yet reached the goal, so not yet an arhat, still aspiring to the supreme security from bondage, and they still have work to do with diligence. So how do they train? The next sentence tells us they make use of suitable resting places or dwelling places. That is, they go to sort of quiet, secluded places where they can develop their meditation. And they associate with good friends. Here the Buddha is reinforcing a point that he often makes, the importance of associating with good congenial friends, those who will support one in one's efforts, who share one's aspirations, one's values, and who will exert a good influence on one. And they nurture their spiritual faculties. What are the spiritual faculties? Here we need somebody who's a Dhammadhara, who knows the Dhamma pretty well. Who will tell me the 5?
That's faith.
Okay, take the microphone. You're on the right track, but let's take the microphone.
Faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom.
Great, wonderful. Exactly. Okay, the 5 spiritual faculties: faith, energy or effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And so these monks in training, in the higher training, still have to strengthen these spiritual faculties to the point where they develop a certain power or capacity for breaking through to higher levels of attainment. Okay, so the Buddha says, when the reason why they still have work to do with diligence, because when these venerable ones resort to suitable dwelling places, associate with good friends, and nurture their spiritual faculties, they may, by realizing it for themselves with direct knowledge, they can here and now enter and dwell in the supreme goal of the spiritual life, for the sake of which they have gone forth into homelessness. So seeing this benefit or this fruit of diligence for those monks, I say they still have work to do with diligence. Okay, at this point I'll ask whether you have any questions on what's been covered so far. Any questions? Somebody behind, in the back? Okay. What is your name again?
Judy.
Judy. Okay, that's right, yeah.
So I was thinking about the results, like, there's the feeling.
In relation to feeling.
And you had
yeah.
the designations under the results.
Yeah.
That they're not absolutely, in other words, unwholesome states increasing is not an absolute result of painful feelings?
Not necessarily. This is why this is the tough one. But what I say is that painful feelings can probably arise. I mean, the Buddha doesn't encourage one to impose painful feelings on oneself. But sometimes when one makes, let's take a pretty clear example, when one makes special effort in meditation, the pains are shooting through the legs, through the back. But if one persists and doesn't just start breaking the posture and get up and give up because of the pain, then it can lead to, I would say, a breakthrough to much higher wholesome states.
So the wholesome states or unwholesome states are a result of one's relationship to feeling time.
Exactly. So I would say that generally what I call the result of what kind of mental states arise is not absolutely determined by the feeling itself, but by the way one responds to the feeling. So, if one is eating, the meal of delicious food, would you like some more ice cream, Venerable Sir? If one knows the purpose of of eating, generally I think one would avoid ice cream. But let's take healthy, nutritious food, which is also delicious. So if one is mindful of the purpose of eating, one could eat it without being overcome by the greed and craving for taste. Any other questions?
Bande, there is a question from the internet.
Yeah.
Bande, are you saying that in this case, a seeker is one who had at least reached stream entry?
Technically, the seeker would include one who has reached the path to stream entry. We're going to see the seekers on the path to stream entry next week. Excuse me? Yeah, we'll have the class next week. That is 7th, April 7th. Yeah, so next week I will take the second half of the sutta, bring the charts on the 7 types of noble disciples, the 7 types of noble ones. Bring that, because I will go through that chart next week. Okay, so we'll break now for the lunch. And then we'll come back after the lunch, let us say 12:10. If there's any questions, we could have a little discussion. And this is the last day of the winter retreat, so they haven't yet prepared the communal lunch that will start tomorrow. But I think they might have, last week did they have the packets of the ramen noodles? Yeah, but for poor Venerable Piyadasi, it was 1971, and he continued on till 1998. So it didn't kill him to have one package of noodles at lunch. Okay, so we'll end with sharing the merits. Okay, so we share the merits with the deities, the nagas, the Buddhas, Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahedika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahedika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahedika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mantaram Etavatacham Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Bhudanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Vichetato Etantare Satakayupapanna Rupiya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukkha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting. Okay, we end with 3 stand up and then we do the 3 bows to the Buddha. Okay, do 3 half bows.
Bow to Bande.